It has been a rough day for me. So, good, I like your attitude already. I got up at 3 a.m. I got on a plane about the size of a can of peas. If any of you have flown into a Reagan, you know what happens. You're flying one way, and then suddenly you're flying another way, and then you're suddenly flying another way. The pilot got on the plane. I'm sure he hadn't been bar mitzvahed yet. And I thought it couldn't get any worse until I came in here. I ushered a couple of people to their seats. Not a tip. Nothing. I had one person ask me whether I was giving a lecture. I said proudly yes. She said, "Where's your tie and jacket?" That's okay, because as my mother used to say, what difference does my happiness make anyway? One last blow to my ego before we start talking about trials. In the course of circulating around, I like to talk to people who come to these events. I do a little market research for Steve. I said, well, of the 4 lectures, which one were you looking most forward to hearing? Thinking, I know which one it'll be, 4 Trials That Changed America. Well, my sample, while small and I hope unrepresentative, overwhelmingly said Michelangelo. Steve said at the beginning of his introduction to the day that some of the faculty would be young and some would be old. He said some would be serious and some would be entertaining. He said some you would remember and some you will forget. My motto as a lecturer is do no harm. So my standards are pretty low. Steve said 800 people have registered for this event. The student population at Amherst College is about 1,800. So you are, let's see, do the math, carry the 3. You are about, 40% of the student population at Amherst. So I want you to behave yourself and give me your attention. Remember, I just tell you, the average grade at Amherst College, by the way, did any of you graduate from Amherst? Do we have any Amherst people? Oh, that's fabulous. I can say anything I want now. The average grade at Amherst College is A-. That means 50% of the students get below A- and 50. You know what averages are, right? Sorry, I forgot. The average grade at one-day university is A+. So you are better on average than the students that I teach. The largest class ever taught at Amherst College was a class called Murder. I taught it. I love talking about the subject of murder. I've done other one-day university talks on the death penalty. Steve says that's a downer. So to lift your spirits, I'm going to talk, among other things, about Nuremberg. Let me not get ahead of myself. So just a couple of other preliminaries. How many of you are lawyers? Please put up your hand. Okay, I want you to keep them up for the next hour and 10 minutes as punishment for your sins. What I want to do is I want to make a relatively simple argument. I have no beautiful slides for you. And I am not going to talk to you about nakedness. I came in for the last question of the last session. So my thesis is very simple. And that is that the American trial, or trials in general, are great testimonies to one of America's greatest virtues, and that is our commitment to the rule of law. Now, the commitment to the rule of law is an imperfect commitment, no doubt. And the United States often fails to vindicate its commitment to the rule of law. All too often, our aspiration to the rule of law goes bad. It's not realized. But as bad as it goes, the aspiration to the rule of law is, I would argue, if not America's central virtue, one of the virtues that we ought to care about the most and endeavor to protect. And as you'll see in talking about trials, the trial form is not inevitable. Indeed, I'm glad you're here today, because many scholars argue that trials are vanishing. In fact, when you go home tonight, take out your Google machine and Google the vanishing trial. And you'll find there's a lot of scholarship about how American trials are disappearing. So I'm going to ask you a question. I want you all to shout out the answer so that you'll all hear and I can see which one of you gets a below average grade. Roughly what percentage of American criminal cases may I just tell you, that person was the person I talked to who said Michelangelo would be the best lecturer. So roughly what percentage of American criminal cases go to trial? What percent, hold on one second, I got to volunteer. What percentage of American criminal cases go to trial? Come on, take a guess. The motto at Amherst is what we don't know, we just make up. How much? 15%, he said. 15% of American criminal cases go to trial. I feel like we're in a silent auction. I got 8%, 5%. I can do this now without your help. So roughly 10% of American criminal cases go to trial. So 9 out of 10 criminal cases do not go to trial. And by the way, when you do a lecture like this, you can often tell a lot about people's relationships because you ask a question and then somebody shouts out an answer, then you look and that person's turning to the person next to him and saying, I told you so, hon. If you go back to 1962, about 11% of all federal cases, that's civil and criminal, went to trial. In 2002, 1% of all federal cases, that's civil and criminal, went to trial. So American trials, aren't you glad you're here today? Because by tomorrow, this lecture would be gone. It would have disappeared. So let's start with not an American, but one of the great commentators on American culture, Alexis de Tocqueville. Tocqueville came to the United States in the early part of the 19th century and wrote this great treatise called Democracy in America. And Tocqueville said, scarcely any social or political question arises in the United States that is not resolved sooner or later into a legal or judicial question. Now, this shouldn't surprise you. It wouldn't surprise most people to know that there's a lot of law in the United States. I want to argue with Tocqueville. I want to say that Tocqueville is only half right. That surely many of our most important social and political questions become legal and judicial ones. What Tocqueville neglected, which is the thesis of my talk today, is the extent to which criminal trials have shaped American political, cultural, and social life. So Tocqueville got it half right. I want to use 4 trials to illustrate the way in which American trials have shaped an important parts of our social, political, and cultural life. My mom would be so proud that I'm arguing with Tocqueville. So what are the elements of modern jury trials? Elements that compel our attention. First, there are these legal elements, what I would call strange elements. You all know some of them, you know, the hearsay rule. You can't admit into court evidence that would be common in everyday conversation. So the language of the law, the language of criminal trials, the language of civil trials is a strange language, but an interesting one. Second, there are what I call the dramatic elements of trials. Trials are performances in which the jury is an audience. And not to get ahead of myself, are any of you old enough in this audience? Well, that was a silly question. To remember the O.J. Simpson case? I feel like we're a Reformed congregation already. You remember Johnny Cochran? We're going to see this line. Remember Johnny Cochran's great line? I don't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning, but I will never, what did I eat? But I will never forget Johnny Cochran's line. Do you remember the line? You like me better than the Michelangelo lecture. Okay. Right? A performance for an audience. And anybody who's ever been a trial lawyer knows that one of the difficulties for trial lawyers with juries is the extraordinary boredom of most American trials. Third element, trials are a form of popular entertainment. You know, there are all kinds of television programs about trial. There are great movies. We're going to actually look at a couple of great movies about trials. And trials, I would argue, express and galvanize national conversation. This is my thesis. This is me against Tocqueville. And lead to important legal, political, and cultural change. But the American trial form is not inevitable. So you think American trials are bad. Think about trials by ordeal, in which a man, typically but not always, a person was lowered into a pit of water that had been blessed to accept innocent people but reject the guilty. If you sunk in the water, you were fished out and deemed to be innocent. But if you floated, by the way, at your next cocktail party, try that one. And then trials in colonial America, there were no lawyers, there were no juries. The purpose was to give the defendant a chance to admit their guilt. So to talk about trials that have changed America, what trial don't you talk about? Again, when I teach my course called Murder, I say to the students, the issue isn't what you teach, it's what you exclude. What Shakespearean play do you not teach in a course called Murder? What Russian novel do you not teach in a course called Murder? Trials that have changed America could have been Sacco and Vanzetti, Leopold and Lode, the Scottsboro Boys, the Chicago 7, the trial of John Hinckley. So let's see which four I picked out. The Scopes Monkey Trial, 1925. By the way, I love this PowerPoint thing. A little fly in, you like that? Okay. The Nuremberg Trial, the O.J. Simpson Trial, and the trial of Bill Clinton. Now, if I was in a class at Amherst, my students would immediately now start to object. Hands would go up. A student would say, Professor Sarat. Another student would say, Austin. Below A-. You picked out 4 trials. Why these 4 trials? By the way, Professor Sarat, one of these trials, the Nuremberg trial, is not an American trial. And by the way, maybe all of them, but certainly the monkey trial, the Nuremberg trial, and impeachment of Bill Clinton might be called political trials as well as legal trials. And I would say to that student roughly the following. My sample is not scientific. After all, I'm talking about so-called great trials. I'm not talking about ordinary trials. What's happening to trials in the United States? They're disappearing. I'm always afraid to ask that kind of question in my own class because the students give you a blank look, and I think to myself, teaching is a wasted life. So I don't claim that these are 4 representative trials. You could pick out others. I hope in the question and answer you'll argue with me about my choice. You'll say, oh, but Austin, there are others that you could have chosen. But I want to use these 4 again, remember, to argue a little bit with Tocqueville, to suggest the ways in which trials in the United States have shaped American history. So let's start with evolution and creationism. So the Scopes Monkey trial is actually an interestingly odd kind of trial. as you'll see. But it started when Tennessee passed the Butler Act, and the Butler Act forbid the teaching of evolution in Tennessee public schools. The defendant in the Scopes monkey trial, John Scopes, he was tried for violating the Butler Act. But John Scopes was an unusual defendant. Scopes didn't remember, actually, whether he taught evolution in his high school class. He didn't remember. And he colluded with the American Civil Liberties Union to challenge the Butler Act. So that's an unusual thing, where a criminal defendant actually, in a sense, volunteers to be put on trial for doing something that he didn't remember whether he did. And interestingly, local officials in the small town in Tennessee, Dayton, Tennessee, they wanted the trial to be there because they thought the trial would bring publicity, as it did, to their little town. So the Scopes monkey trial was perceived by the town elders as an economic development idea. That's the second platform in Donald Trump's campaign. Okay, by the way, I just wanted you to know I'm completely nonpartisan. Completely nonpartisan. So I will have something else to say about Trump. Okay. So this trial, in part, is very famous because it attracted two of the early part of the 20th century's most colorful early American characters. So, do you recognize who those folks are? Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan. Let's see whether the slide says that. Yes. Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan. Not a usual lineup of lawyers for a small town case in Tennessee. And Darrow, of course, one of the most famous criminal defense lawyers, and William Jennings Bryan, three-time Democratic presidential nominee, one of the best-known orators and lecturers of his era. But note, he hadn't tried a case for more than 3 decades before he was brought in as one of the prosecutors in the Scopes monkey trial. And Darrow, one of the most famous lawyers, had just come from defending Leopold and Loeb. And I emphasize this, he wanted to use the Scopes case to, quote, arouse the nation to the evil at hand. And the evil that Darrow thought was at hand was the suppression of freedom of speech. Well, Darrow got his way. The Scopes monkey trial was the first trial in the United States to be broadcast live on the radio. And it was covered by reporters from all over the world, including H.L. Mencken of the Baltimore Sun. So, cue the newsreel.
The giants of legal oratory, Dudley Field Malone and Clarence Darrow, defended John Scopes' beliefs before the world. It was John Butler's anti-evolutionary law that prohibited the teaching of any theory that denied the story of divine creation.
You notice the fancy way in which we're doing this. Cue the newsreel, stop. The prosecution attacked the theory of evolution by arguing it was incompatible with the literal reading and literal teachings of the Bible. And the prosecution contended that evolution should be rejected because it held that there was no creator and that humans had descended from monkeys. And then I love this quote, not even from American monkeys. Now, one of the perils, as you know, of delivering a lecture is to use your Donald Trump line too early. Had I not, I would have said, Donald Trump would have said that. But since I have already used my Donald Trump line, I won't say that. The defense. Darrow argued that the Butler Act violated a teacher's individual rights and academic freedom and posed a threat to freedom of speech. He compared the Butler Act and the attack on evolution to a modern inquisition. In a way, the Scopes monkey trial represented an important argument in American history that we are reliving today. The argument is whether or not religion has a place in our public life, and what part of our public life ought to be dictated by religious belief. Darwin was a secularist. He believed in the separation of church and state. And of course, Bryan thought that it was to the Bible that political leaders ought to turn for their inspiration. The dramatic climax of this trial involved Clarence Darrow calling William Jennings Bryan, prosecutor, as a witness. So the lawyers, please put up your hand. Come on. Put up your hand, lawyers. Really. Far fewer of them. The vanishing lawyer. So this is, to say the least, quite unusual to put the prosecution, call the prosecution as a witness. And what Darrow was trying to show is that a literal interpretation of the Bible was simply untenable. And among the things he asked was, do you believe that Eve was the first woman? Bryan said, yes. Do you believe that she was literally made of Adam's rib? Yes, I do. Did you ever discover where Cain got his wife? No, I've never tried to find that out. The Bible says he got one, doesn't it? Didn't wait for the answer. Were there other people on the earth at that time? Bryan says, I can't say. There were no others recorded, but Cain got a wife. And Bryan's response was, that's what the Bible says. Keep that in mind when we revisit this kind of testimony. You remember Bill Clinton when he says, it depends on what the meaning of is? Well, that's right, Mr. Bryan. That's what the Bible does say, but that's not responsive to the question. So the verdict, Scopes was found guilty. He was found $100. The Tennessee Supreme Court later found the Butler Act to be constitutional, but set aside the conviction because only the jury could set the fine, not the judge. Judges couldn't set fines above $50. Butler Act specified a minimum fine of $100. Okay, so what is the impact of the Scopes trial? First, to some extent, the anti-evolution momentum slowed, didn't stop, but I think to some extent it slowed. The Scopes trial lives on in popular culture. Have any of you seen the movie Inherit the Wind? I mean, is it, as my oldest daughter would say, the goodest movie you've ever seen? It's a very good movie. Let's see a little bit. Let's see a little bit of it.
I am willing to sit here and endure Mr. Drummond's sneering and his disrespect, for he is pleading the case of the prosecution by his contempt for all that is holy. I object, I object, I object. On what grounds? Is it possible that something is holy to the celebrated agnostic?
Yes. The individual human mind. In a child's power.
I also want to be a director in Hollywood. Cut! Right? The individual human mind. Now, the argument about evolution has not gone away. So this is a recent survey. 32% of the American public believe in evolution. 87% of American scientists believe in evolution. And a little comparative data. Would you like some comparative data? Well, you're going to get it. So I don't know how well you can see this, but the blue line represents belief that evolution is true. And the United States is just above Turkey. Iceland leads the pack, Denmark, Sweden, France, Japan, United Kingdom, Norway, Germany. So the Scopes trial didn't resolve the argument about evolution. Indeed, it didn't resolve it as a public matter or as a legal matter. Throughout the 20th century, state legislatures and school boards have, in a sense, tried to get around the belief that creationism could not be taught. Creationism has been renamed. Creationism has been offered as a balance. So there's much confusion in the United States, I hope we can talk about it afterwards, about academic freedom, about what it means, and whether or not faculty members at universities, at colleges like mine, are obligated to present all sides of every question. Well, some state legislatures have said, in order to have academic freedom, you have to present creationism, or what is now called intelligent design, alongside evolution. Okay, so now we go to the second great American trial, Nuremberg. Now, why do I include Nuremberg? Because remember, my title is Trials That Changed America, not American Trials. And I would argue that one of the central trials of the 20th century and its impact on the United States was the Nuremberg trial. And what we now take for granted as matters of international law and matters of international human rights was at the time of Nuremberg highly contested. So Nuremberg involved a series of military trials. The most important of the one we're going to talk about, involved the trial of 23 of the most important leaders of the Third Reich. And it was called one of the great trials of the 20th century, one of the great trials in history. Here are our key defendants: Göring, Hess, Martin Bormann. Now, remember what I said about the rule of law. Whatever the defects of the rule of law, I argue that the rule of law is one of the most important aspirations of American political and cultural life. That without it, whatever our troubles are, we'd have even bigger troubles. So here we're victors after the Second World War. We're dealing with people who were, by all odds, reprehensible. The British Prime Minister suggested that we execute them summarily. Stalin proposed executing 50 to 100,000. It was only after Roosevelt's death that Truman approved the plan for the trial of these European war criminals. What were the charges? Crimes against the peace, waging wars of aggression, war crimes, and last, crimes against humanity. And you all know that part of the argument about the Nuremberg trials was that the Nuremberg trials represent a kind of ex post facto, that there was no existing law in Germany that made what the Nazi leaders did illegal. So let's see, can we get a little bit of this clip? Clip man? Can we get a little bit of this clip? Not that one. Wrong clip. So,
An extraordinary men
that's the
can
wrong,
delude themselves into the
That's the
commission of crimes.
it's the wrong clip. Kill the clip. Not to worry. Remember what my mother said, what difference does my happiness make anyway? So have any of you done PowerPoint lectures before? So if you've done PowerPoint lectures, you know that this is going to happen, and you don't rely on it. So there's Jackson's opening statement. Could I have a little approval, please? Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson took a leave from the United States Supreme Court to lead the American prosecution at Nuremberg. This was his opening statement. The wrongs that we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. The common sense of mankind demands that law shall not stop with the punishment of petty crimes by little people. It must also reach men who possess themselves of great power to make deliberate and concerted use of it to set in motion evils which leave no home in the world untouched. And then look at the end. So that men and women of goodwill in all countries may have leave to live underneath the law. That's what Jackson contended was at stake in Nuremberg. Göring's defense, just use him as an example. Göring denied any complicity. He said he stood up for what he had done. He denied that his actions were dictated by the desires to subjugate foreign peoples, to murder them or rob them. The only motive which guided me was his ardent love for my people, its happiness, its freedom, and its life. The verdict. 19 of 23 were found guilty. 12 were given death sentences. Now, at this point, if I had more time, which I don't, we could talk about the death penalty. Those of you who believe in it and those of you who are opposed to it, and whether those of you who are opposed to it would still be opposed when it came to the execution of some of these defendants. Göring was found guilty and sentenced to death, though he robbed the executioner. Hess was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, committed suicide. And Bormann was found guilty in absentia. Now, critics of the Nuremberg trial, after the fact, argued that Nuremberg hadn't overcome or hadn't escaped the problem of so-called victor's justice. It had just taken a new form. Supreme Court of the United States Chief Justice Harlan Fiske Stone, he called the Nuremberg trial a high-grade lynching party. I'm so sorry there are no Amherst people in the audience, because Amherst claims many great people amongst its graduates. Some of them are going to go to graduate school soon. But we have more than our share of former directors of the CIA, John J. McCloy, John Deutsch, William Webster, all graduates of Amherst. We have one president, graduated Amherst, America's greatest president, most alliterated name, Calvin Coolidge. And we have one Supreme Court Justice, Harlan Fiske Stone. And we have a Harlan Fiske stone on the campus. Appropriate way to commemorate Mr. Justice Stone. So how did Nuremberg change America? Remember my argument, Tocqueville only got it half right. Sooner or later, every legal and political question becomes a judicial one. And my argument is that sooner or later in these great trials, things in the United States change. How did Nuremberg change America? It prompted American commitment to the development of international criminal law, including the Convention Against Genocide. Led America to be committed to the Nuremberg principles, that even war crimes are committed, even in war, crimes are committed by individuals who must be held accountable. You all know about Belgium? That's the kind of question that drives my students crazy. Well, what about Belgium? Belgium claims universal jurisdiction. So some leaders, Henry Kissinger wouldn't travel to Belgium because he was afraid that he would be seized and put on trial and accused of crimes. Okay, well, what is the legacy of Nuremberg? One of the great issues at Nuremberg was how, if at all, does the United States differ from the Germans? Think about McCarthyism and the Red Scare. Think about the War on Terror. Now, I promise I will be really nice to you if you cue up that clip. And if it's the right clip, we're going to say Hosanna. This is it. This is the right clip.
So vast and heinous that they beggar the imagination. No one who has sat through the trial can ever forget them. Men sterilized because of political belief. A mockery made of friendship and faith. The murder of children. How easily it can happen.
How easily it can happen. Judgment at Nuremberg. Have any of you seen that film? Great film. And one of the issues that's on trial in Judgment at Nuremberg really is the Red Scare in the United States. And this idea, how easily it can happen, how allegedly civilized nations dedicated, amongst other things, to the rule of law, can betray their values in the face of threats to their physical survival. Shall we say it together? That dilemma, I'll say it alone, that dilemma is as old as Socrates. Shall we say it together? By the way, you notice no one on that side said anything, no one on that side said anything, and these people are wondering, why are you people chanting behind us? Okay, trial number 3, OJ. How many trials does the New York Times call the trial of the century? Well, this is one of them. And this is one of my favorite lines. I don't know, are any of you in the entertainment? Don't, you know, there's a rhetorical, you're in the entertainment industry? Oh, Larry King said, the Simpson trial was so important that if we had God booked and OJ was available, we would move God. And I have many images, like O.J. Simpson calling up Charlton Heston and saying, don't come on tonight, or, okay, you're not as old as I thought you were. I thought that was a really good line. So the O.J. Simpson case, as you know, came out of a troubled marriage. O.J. and his wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, they filed for divorce. There was a famous 911 call in 1993 that we're not going to play, where Nicole Brown Simpson called the police asking for help because O.J. was there to abuse her. In June of 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were found dead. Evidence found at the scene led the police to suspect O.J. O.J.'s lawyers convinced the LAPD to allow Simpson to turn himself in, but Simpson failed to appear. You remember what he did? Remember what he did? What did he do? He got in his white Bronco, driven by his friend Al Cowlings. The 3 television networks and CNN all interrupted their programs to cover the chase. 95 million viewers watched the white Bronco. Chase ended at 8 o'clock. Can you give me this? Clip guy? By the way, what's your name? Eric, could you give me this clip? No, don't give me that one. Don't give me that one. It's okay, Eric. Can you give us that one? There it is. Sound?
It is.
But look at the people standing on the freeway there, waving.
There
are a number of people standing on the side of the road. Just the curious and also well-wishers. We watch people wave and blow kisses as Mr.
O.J. pled not guilty. And what began then was this great drama in which the so-called dream team, Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, and 2 relatively unknowns at the time, Peter Schenck and Barry Neufeld, Barry Schenck and Peter Neufeld, went on to found the Innocence Project and have made DNA one of the most important factors in the recent history of American criminal justice. The state of California was represented by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. The trial was presided over by Lance Ito. And just to refresh your recollection, the racial composition of the jury, the gender composition, 10 women, 2 men, 9 of the people on the jury were African Americans. Prosecution claimed that O.J. went to Nicole's condominium, that he stabbed her. And when Ron Goldman showed up, Simpson murdered him as well. Simpson allegedly left a trail of blood. Mark Fuhrman. Is this a trip down memory lane? See? How many of you remember Michelangelo personally, right? Mark Fuhrman testified that he went to the house to question O.J., went over the wall. He found, among other things, blood drops and the famous bloody glove. The defense tried to discredit the prosecution's DNA evidence. Remember that? The LA crime lab did a bad job. No chain of custody. The DNA, the blood was contaminated. And they claimed that O.J. was at home packing to go to Chicago, and when pressed, they offered this alternative theory, that the murder had been committed by drug dealers. And then, here it is. Remember trials, the dramatic presentation before an audience? Johnny Cochran said in his closing argument, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. A very memorable line when there's O.J. trying to get his hand into the bloody glove. The verdict, as you all know, Simpson was found not guilty. 150 million people watched the verdict. 91% of the audience for television was watching the O.J. Simpson verdict. How many of you did that? How many of you remember watching the O.J. Simpson verdict? Yeah, me too. I watched. I was glued to it. And then, I promise this will be my last comment about Donald Trump for the next 30 seconds. The U.S. economy lost $25 billion from the likes of me. I'm responsible for like 25 cents of that, watching the verdict. The Gallup poll found that 78% of African Americans thought that the verdict was correct, but only 42% of whites thought that the verdict was correct. Newsweek found that 63% of the American public less confident in the criminal justice system as a result of the O.J. Simpson case. You all know that there was a civil trial brought by the parents and of Goldman and Brown, and that civil jury found O.J. Simpson liable for the killing. How would the O.J. Simpson trial change America? Scott Turow, famous author, said the Simpson trial intensified our obsession with celebrities, movie stars, athletes, the beautiful. Michael Eric Dyson called it a racial earthquake. And Jeffrey Toobin said that the Simpson trial showed that when it came to law enforcement and belief in police, black and white people in 1995 live in different countries. Now, I'll bet you know what the next slide is going to say. Come on, I'll bet you know what the next slide is going to say. In fact, you know what I'm going to say? I'll bet you know. Oh, I said that already. Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray. The racial divide in American criminal justice is as great or greater today than it was at the time of the O.J. Simpson trial. Okay, the last of our 4 great trials, 4 trials that changed America. Not a standard legal trial. Not a standard legal trial. So at the time of Clinton, there was a kind of controversy. What parts of the private lives of public figures are relevant? Anthony Lewis said, prosecuting a president for lying about sex was grotesque. Andrew Sullivan, writing in 1998, said that characterological concerns were actually at the center of the way in which we ought to think about a president. He called Clinton a cancer on the culture. You remember Paula Jones? All this really came out of the sexual harassment suit brought by Paula Jones against Bill Clinton. Here's the timeline. That's a very famous picture. That is a very famous picture. You remember that picture? My Aunt Irene, the matriarch of my family, she really liked Bill Clinton a lot. She didn't care about his sex or who he had sex with. I guess that's the most important sentence. She cared about her Social Security. The economy was doing fine. She didn't care about who he was having sex with. She was, however, upset that Monica Lewinsky had to be Jewish. Clinton and Lewinsky began what I'm calling a sexual relationship. As you know, Clinton would contest this idea. They had 9 sexual encounters. Their relationship ended in May of 1997, which Lewinsky described as dump day. Oh, wait, whoa, 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 whoa. Whoa, we believe in the rule of law. Right, there's Linda Tripp. Lewinsky confessed to Tripp about the affair, and Tripp did what all good friends do, which is they tape record the conversations about sex with the president. She gave those tapes to Kenneth Starr. The blue dress. We all remember the blue dress. Are you having a Barry Shank tingle? The blue dress contained DNA evidence. The DNA evidence linked the blue dress to Clinton. Kenneth Starr had been appointed to investigate the Whitewater controversy in Arkansas land deals. His mandate was extended. He submitted his report to Congress in 1998. Clinton said, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Ms. Lewinsky." Can we get a little bit of this? Eric?
But I want to say one thing to the American people. I want you to listen to me. I'm going to say this again. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. I never.
Clinton was called to testify before the grand jury investigating the possibility of perjury. He was asked whether or not he was having sex. He said, "It depends upon what the meaning of the word is. If the meaning of is and never has been, that's one thing. How many of you think the word is means is and never has been? I mean, this guy, right, there's a whole department at Amherst that deals with this. House of Representatives vote to impeach. Two charges. Remember, impeachment is just the indictment. The president may be impeached for treason, bribery, and high crimes and misdemeanors. Now there's a prize. Tell me who those 2 folks are. Rehnquist was the easy one. All right, tell me how old Strom Thurmond was in that picture. By the way, remember what our motto is: what we don't know, we just make up. Dale Bumpers delivered what I think is the, maybe most memorable part of the Senate trial. Here was his defense of Clinton. We're here today because the president suffered, this is his defense lawyer, a terrible moral lapse, a marital infidelity, not a breach of the public trust. It was a sex scandal. H.L. Mencken, do you remember Mencken? Do you remember? Just say yes. Do you remember Mencken? H.L. Mencken said, when you hear someone say this is not about money, it's about money. And when you hear someone say this is not about sex, it's about sex. You pick your own adjective to describe the president's conduct. Remember, this is his defense lawyer. I would use indefensible, outrageous, unforgivable, shameless. But no one suggested that Bill Clinton committed a political crime against the state. If you honor the Constitution, you can't convict him. Public opinion, 1999, 2/3 of the American public wanted Clinton to remain in, remember my Aunt Irene? Wanted Clinton to remain in office. The verdict, 2/3 was required to convict. On the first article of impeachment, 45 guilty, 55 not guilty. On the second, 50-50. Remember, 2/3 to convict. So Clinton is acquitted. How did the trial of Bill Clinton change the United States? And here again, I hope we can have some conversation because you may just completely disagree with the first one of these. So I'll skip that one, go to the second one. I think it contributed to the election of George Bush. This is totally fabulous. Again, it's like being in synagogue. You know something's important is happening, you have no idea what it is. Today, it's harder for politicians to hide their sex scandal. And again, I could have made a huge slide. You all, right? David Vitter, you know what David Vitter is doing today? He's running for governor of Louisiana. Did you see the news report of the ad that his opponent is running against him? Google meanest ad ever. I mean, it's unbelievable. So it's harder for them to hide their sex. But I think the Clinton trial has led to a more complicated understanding of the public relevance of private lives. The argument about the public relevance, I think, is being won by Anthony Lewis, not by Andrew Sullivan. In the national poll conducted in 2011, only 1/3 of the respondents said they would not vote for a presidential candidate who had an extramarital affair. Barack Obama, you remember Barack Obama? Did not have an extramarital affair, but he admitted to using drugs. Kind of unthinkable. Yeah, do you remember Gary Hart? Okay, so this is the conclusion. Remember what my purpose is. What's my purpose? What's my purpose? Teaching is a wasted life. What's my purpose? My purpose is to have an argument with Tocqueville. Right? Tocqueville got it half right. Tocqueville said sooner or later every important political and social question becomes a legal and judicial one. These trials remind us that trial by jury is a cornerstone of the rule of law, which has been called the lamp by which human freedom lives. These trials show that in one way or another, the society in which we live is committed to the idea of fairness. Remember what I said, committed to the idea of fairness. But these trials also show how that idea is played out, who the idea of fairness protects and whose interests it serves. And they show the importance of Tocqueville's observation, but also that legal trials can help change our political, social, and cultural values. So let me just end with this. If the American trial, in fact, vanishes, as costly, as complicated, as sometimes unfair as they are, and gives ways to arbitration, civil settlement, plea bargaining, I think American society will be the worse for it. So the next time, you're reading some arcane description of the complicated, archaic ways in which American trials are conducted, with their strange rules of evidence, their high costs. And the next time you hear a golden-tongued orator say that if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, and you think, what kind of justice system is it? Think about America, what America would be like without criminal trials. Think about America, what America would be like without the effort through those trials to preserve and protect the rule of law. And if that doesn't give you goosebumps, I must have liked Michelangelo better.